the O.J. Simpson case trial in the United States, domestic violence entered the living rooms. People started talking. Media started to cover it.
Women who are able to seek safety, who are able to integrate back into society, children who can sleep through the night, who don't have nightmares anymore, who are doing better in school because they're no longer in abusive households. This is the real impact of our work.
For me, what gives me hope is the young women that I see everywhere doing things.
Welcome to Conversations with the Tufenkian Foundation, where we speak with people and partners shaping Armenia's future from the ground up. My name is Rupen Janbazian. The campaign to pass Armenia's first domestic violence law in 2017 marked a turning point in the country's reckoning with gender-based violence. At the forefront of that movement was the Women's Support Center, which had already spent years advocating for survivors and challenging taboos. Its director, Maro Matosian, played a leading role in those efforts. I had the chance to speak with Maro at the time while covering the story for the Armenian Weekly, and her determination left a lasting impression. Launched in 2010 as a pilot initiative supported by the Tufenkian Foundation, USAID, and the Armenian International Women's Association, AIWA, the center has since grown into a national resource and, in many ways, a movement. Under Maro's leadership, the Women's Support Center today provides shelter, legal aid, psychological counseling, and sustained advocacy for survivors of domestic violence across Armenia. We're joined today by three remarkable women to reflect on this journey. Maro Matosian, the founding director who has led the center throughout its journey, Jilozian, the center's director of development, who has been instrumental in expanding its impact, and Lenna Garibian, an advisory board member and advocate based in the US, who brings a diasporan perspective to the center's work and relevance. I thank you all three for being here, so let's dive right in.
Thank you.
Maro, let's start at the really beginning. Let's start back in 2010. Tell us about how the idea for the Women's Support Center started, how it took shape, and how you were convinced at the time that this might actually work in Armenia.
Wow, loaded question. Rupen, thank you for the introduction. And yes, you're right. This started as a project of Tufenkian Foundation as a pilot program, actually, with the U.S. Embassy and AIWA. And we started with 40 beneficiaries per year, thinking that let's see how it goes. And we were not expecting to have more. At that time, domestic violence was very much taboo, was a silent crime. Nobody talked about it, and nobody even recognized that there is such a problem in Armenia. And we had to do a lot of convincing, and to the authorities and to the population at large. They were saying, no, our families are very, united and, on a good value system. And then maybe somewhere in a remote village there is such a case, but we don't have such a. Obviously, they were very wrong. And when we started that year, we realized then afterwards that it's a passion of ours, that as women, we wanted to be more engaged into this issue. And that's when we invited from the diaspora experts in social services, in psychologists, people that worked in shelters. I went and got trained in the United States, in New Jersey, and we read a lot of material, which is a bit in English, and we brought it back to the staff. And it started basically as a concept. We understood that we did not know what the problem was. And slowly we built on that. I have to say that at the beginning, for example, there were women who were so endangered, we didn't know where to put them. We put them in our office. Oh. And it was very sad. It was a very problematic, and for our security and for the women. But fortunately, people in the diaspora, GHM Foundation initially and throughout, supported us to open the first shelter. Mm-hmm. And that was of paramount importance because at the shelter we understood the complexity of the problem. Women stayed with us longer and we could understand more in details what was happening. But at those initial years, up to the law was accepted, There were a number of maybe 1 to 3 women organizations, maybe a handful of activists, and we all consistently, year after year, we did street protests, street activism to raise awareness to the population and to take out from this silent crime, from the taboo. We were, in a way, I don't want to say fortunate, because there were very heavy cases of Mariam Kevorkian and Hasmi Khachadurian, that there were open trials. And for the first time, domestic violence, we invited a lot of media to participate also to cover this issue. And for the first time, population understood the domestic violence. And it was like the O.J. Simpson case trial in United States. Domestic violence entered the living rooms. Right. People started talking. Media started to cover it. And this is how more and more the discussion about domestic violence came about. And we were very, very active. There was a coalition formed to stop violence against women. Right. And we are very vociferous, very active, very out in the front. We did a lot of street protests, and we're pushing the government for a law. The government was not ready. There was no political will, absolutely. I remember when we were talking about this issue, they were saying from the ministry, sorry, no law, we cannot do anything about it. So, and this is why, because of our activism, when in 2017, Armenia signed a partnership agreement with the European Union took us into consideration and said one of the conditions would be to adopt a domestic violence law. Mm-hmm. The domestic violence law came about. It was not far from perfect. Right. Had many, many issues that we did not agree with. But we consider that it's a stepping stone. And let's start from there. And then, and it's actually when the law came into effect, there was more and more women who were knocking at our door in the hope that they will be protected. Mm-hmm. But having said that, when I look back, when you asked me to look back so many years back, when we started with 40, now we are at 1,000 per year. Right. Something's working well. Well, I'm happy that we can serve so many people, but of course, the problem is far from being combated. I have to say that this is a global problem. It's not, Armenia is far not the only one that handles this, and we should not look down upon our people because there is domestic violence. It's a global problem. In those countries where they have support centers, where they have shelters, where they have legislation in place, where the perpetrator is made accountable for his crime, that's where you diminish and femicides, deaths of women, and when you diminish the cases of domestic violence. And I think Ani can talk more about what happened since the law was accepted, because that is very important of the many areas that the Women's Support Center deals with. We started as a service provision, and then we ended up into doing community work, training policemen, training social workers, and so forth, and also doing advocacy work, which is so important for systemic and sustainable institutional level work.
Ani, Maro just mentioned that the center handles over 1,000 cases a year. But let's go beyond the numbers. How do you define the impact of the center, and what are some of the challenges that remain, and those challenges both at a state level and a societal level?
Yeah, and we've had a tremendous number of women who are seeking support from our center now over the years, and the numbers continue to grow and grow every year. So we had about 1,200 women and children reach out for support last year, and if the trend continues as it has been, we can expect around 1,400 women and children by the end of this year. But beyond numbers, the impact is something we see in the day-to-day life of the women and the children who we support. And you can see that, when a woman comes to us completely depressed, frustrated, has anxiety, is suffering from trauma, and when she comes through our center for a period of time, works with our team members, you can see that over that period of time, her sort of blossoming, and that really is tremendously impactful to see women who are able to seek safety, who are able to integrate back into society, children who can sleep through the night, who don't have nightmares anymore, who are doing better in school because they're no longer in abusive households. This is the real impact of our work. Right. And this is the real, impact that we see on their lives. Speaking a bit to the challenges, though, we've had all of these, I would say, great successes over the years in the sense that, as Maro alluded to, there's a lot more awareness around domestic violence now. We mobilized a lot of community support in the early days. As Maro mentioned, there was a lot of street protests, campaigning. All of that had a huge impact on the way that people perceive the issue. So whereas before it was really shrouded in secrecy, now there's been a real, I would say, public reckoning with the fact that domestic violence exists in this country as it does in other places in the world, and people now recognize that it does, and they recognize that we need to be doing something about it. So that perception shift really happened just over the last 10 or 15 years. So it's really tremendous to see that in real time. And the other thing, that we've seen, and Maro alluded to as well, is the legislation. So we now have a legislative framework that we can use to address domestic violence, whereas before we had nothing in place, absolutely no political will. And now, at the very least, we have something that, as a mechanism to actually support the women and children who we serve. But challenges persist. We made a lot of improvements to the law. Our center was sort of front and center in that effort in the early years to get the law adopted, and then over the years to really overhaul the existing legislation. So as of July last year, we now have an entirely sort of a huge overhaul to the domestic violence law, not just the domestic violence law, but also the criminal code. And as a result, we have better definitions for all forms of domestic violence. We have now the intimate partner violence concept that's been introduced. So prior to July of 2024, only women who are in registered marital unions could even be seen as domestic violence victims under the law. And now that's entirely changed, where any person who's experiencing domestic violence, whether that's in a dating relationship, it can be an ex-partner, these are people who are now fully covered under the law. And beyond that, children who witness domestic violence are now seen themselves as victims of domestic violence. This is really important because we know that children who even witness domestic violence can have some of the same traumatic impacts of it as those who are being abused themselves. So witnessing domestic violence can be really traumatic for children. Stalking has been introduced as a criminal offense. It's also very important. So we've made a lot of improvements to the legislative framework, but challenges persist because there's still misinterpretations of the law. There are still issues with enforcement. So we can speak to that a little bit more. But overall, I see just a lot of progress that has been made. And beyond that, our center has been really very active in professionalized training of police officers, of social workers, psychologists, others who are on the front lines of doing this work. And that's also really important because, back when we started this work, police, they couldn't even, document cases properly. They didn't even understand what domestic violence was. And now over the years, after a decade and more of working with the police, we see a much more improved response to domestic violence than we ever did before. So these are all, small changes that we made over time. We've made changes to the police risk assessment procedures. So now they can better assess the danger that is presented when they're trying to support, a survivor of domestic violence. So all of these things are so important, and they're all kind of stepping stones that we've and milestones that we've seen over the years.
Thank you. Yeah, you mentioned the updated law and the criminal code and the trainings that go hand in hand. How is I'd be interested to know how are those trainings being perceived by the law enforcement officers? What are some of the issues and challenges that are associated with that? If you can speak to that.
Rupen, let me jump in because the first training I did in 2013. And I remember there was a group of 5 policemen, mixed women and men. And after the third day, it was a 5-day training. And after the third day, I was going nuts because they were resisting me. The women are the instigators. Poor man, husband, he comes home. The woman constantly asks for more money. Of course, he's going to get upset with her and maybe slap her and all that. I mean, I couldn't get through them. And I was desperate. I mean, they really perceived that the women are the cause of domestic violence. So we had a woman at the shelter who had a very bad experience with the police who did not protect her. So I asked her to come and talk to this policeman. And when she recounted her experience and she described what was happening with her and all that, that's when they really got it. Right. But then after that, we learned also how to address the policeman. It's a special contingent that sometimes they are very, these are middle-aged men, the vast majority, that are set in their ways. Right. And they have this patriarchal mentality, and it's very difficult to get through their mind issues. But I have to say that it worked in tandem. We noticed that the training, it had its impact, but also their experiences, seeing the cases of domestic violence, also taught them. Right. So as Ani said, not all of them, of course, but I would say the vast majority, they're much more sensitized to the issue. We have training modules we developed, and the modules that we developed, we also take into consideration their responses, what they ask us during the training, to understand, where are their blockage, what they can understand and what they don't understand, and address those issues. A lot of the prejudices, gender stereotypes, not understanding, trauma. They don't understand what trauma is and the effects of trauma. So these are new concepts, which is not easy to absorb. Sometimes donor organizations, they have funding for, let's say, 2-3 hours of training. That's not enough. Right. Sometimes they say 2 days of training. Again, that's not enough. And you have to do constantly refresher trainings and all that. Unfortunately, the government doesn't put money into training. So we have to rely on the donor organizations. But yes, it's a uphill battle. And we try now to push the modules and the curriculum. We work with the Council of Europe to develop a manual for the policemen, to include them in the police academy as a manual. But there are many areas, as Ani said, that we have to knock at the doors to change this, to change that,
Yeah, I think the operative word that you used is sensitization, because a one-off training hardly ever changes the situation, and especially when it comes to a mindset shift, perception shift. Right, you really need to be working with these individuals for a really long period of time. And we started this work, as Maro said, in 2013, working with police. And now we've seen, after a decade, really the fruit of our labor. But also, as Maro mentioned, like you do see more and more cases over time, so that also improves your ability to react better. But I would say there's also one other factor, which is that when you have a strong advocate at the head of the department, that makes a real difference as well. And we've seen that improvement after the Velvet Revolution, after changes, and state authorities taking this situation more seriously. We see also changes in the police department and their leadership, and that makes a huge difference in the end.
We have now partners with whom we can, at the state level, with whom we can collaborate, we can communicate. They consult us, being that we are sort of experts in the field now, and they check with us. And this relationship, this dialogue that is between us is very, very helpful, because they understand also that they need guidance. And we want to make sure that they go on the right track also. And they know that we observe on the ground what's happening. Right. And we come back to them and they say that, in this region, that is happening. For example, in Vayot Zor, there is a province in Armenia, when there was no domestic support center, there was no reporting of any case. And they were telling us, because the population is very scarce there. We accepted that. What could we say? We didn't have any other information. But the moment the Domestic Violence Support Center was created, the cases have started to come. So obviously there's a correlation between services and cases. And maybe, Ani, you can talk a bit about what we created also in 2019.
Yeah, before talking about, the last few years, I also wanted to say it's about services, but there's also a growing confidence, not only in the services that our domestic violence centers offer, but also a little bit more confidence in the police response. And now that there is legislation, women know that at the very least there is something that is there to support them. So it's services, it's improved perceptions around domestic violence, attitudes around domestic violence. And also, the confidence level, the law, all of these things have had such a great impact to the point now we see so much more reporting. So people often, kind of misinterpret that as a growing prevalence of domestic violence.
Right.
We don't have any reason to believe that the prevalence has changed so much. It's just that the reporting patterns really have. And women are really coming out of the shadows now more than they ever did before. If we fast forward to 2019, 2020, so a couple of years after passing the domestic violence law, the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs began a nationwide project to set up domestic violence support centers in every region of the country. And they called on our center to take a leading effort on this. So we've trained all of their service providers. We offer them with continuing mentorship, refresher trainings, one-off trainings on special topics. When we have the means to, we bring experts from outside to train not only our team, but all the regional providers. And importantly, we've also set up standards. So all of our centers now go off of the same best practices that we use at our center. Everything from intake to our referral procedures to our database structures, the way that we work, the consultation, everything has been standardized, and we take a very unified approach now to providing services in every corner of the country.
Yeah, these are NGOs. These are not state. The government now takes a much more of a proactive role and minimally subsidizes these centers and us as well. But 10% maybe of, but still, it's a commitment on their part. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it can contribute to this culture shift that's happening clearly, and it's great to hear that there's added confidence when it comes to reporting, layers of protection, and so forth. I'd be interested to get the diaspora perspective of all this, Lenna. And you've supported the center for many years now from the U.S. What drew you to the cause and to the center specifically? And how do you see the diaspora's role in pushing for change around really complex issues like gender-based violence?
Thank you, Rupen. Yeah, I visited the center in early 2017, and I had heard about the work before that, but finally visited then. And I was drawn to be involved simply by the courage of the women that I saw that had actually chosen this as their profession. Early on, before 2017, but even then, the women that were involved, that were supporting the actual shelter led by Maro, were risking their personal safety every day to be there and to be vocal on the front lines and really enduring a lot of ridicule in a what was and continues to be a patriarchal society. So that choice, I think, really, really inspired me in terms of why I've stayed involved. I think you've heard the impact, right? I mean, phenomenal impact in the lives of women and their children who come through the shelters, receive those services, that really rehabilitate them and give them that confidence to go back and live their lives. But then also, so that collective impact across all of those survivors, but then also this sort of scalable impact that you're seeing, sort of the institutional reform, through the training, through the advocacy, and through the work with the government. So phenomenal impact of an incredibly small investment. And it just was something that was very different to me that I'd ever seen in Armenia. So, and then, I have, in terms of the diasporan role, I think we consider ourselves having sort of three prongs in the diaspora. We obviously are supporting fundraising. We do that on a regular basis. But I think even more importantly, we're really committed to community engagement. So we are working across the communities specifically in the U.S. to educate the communities on the work of the center and the domestic violence in general as an issue in Armenia. It's the work that the center is doing is providing a really unique lens into what's happening in Armenia on a day-to-day basis as well, apart from traditional Armenian media. So I think people are really, really eager to hear what's going on in Armenia and how are women being impacted by that. And then equally, this community engagement that we've been doing really is just elevating the conversation around domestic violence, which is, to Maro's point, a global problem. It's a problem in the United States too. And in our communities, we're not comfortable talking about that as well. So typically after every time we go into a community, whether it's a remote session or we're actually having people and we're talking about this, somebody comes up to me and says, I was affected by this when I was a kid. I was affected by this, and where can I give money? And it's a really, really unique place to be where you're sort of opening up these sort of, wounds in people's lives. So that's been very impactful. And I think that's broadened sort of the support for the organization. And I think the last of the three prongs is really around knowledge exchange and partnerships. Maro is a lifelong learner. She talked to you about how, when they founded the center, they really set out to learn everything that they could. And that continues, really. I'll give you an example. In 2019, funded by the Tufenkian Foundation, we organized a knowledge exchange visit for then Deputy Minister of Labor and Social Affairs, Jana Andreasian. And during that visit, we actually sort of charted the path of the domestic violence survivor from the moment she picks up the phone to call the police, to the point at which she is receiving rehabilitation services. So it was a 7-day visit. We visited about 20 government and non-government centers just to provide knowledge exchange and sort of best practices on how it's done in the United States, specifically across Massachusetts. And with that visit, we also forged some partnerships and some knowledge exchange relationships that we can still leverage as things happen and evolve in this country. So, I think the diaspora's involvement is critical, but I will also say that the Women's Support Center, in terms of the way its approach in general, has been really, really collaborative, and I think that has differentiated the center and the progress that you've seen here.
If I can add, thank you, Lenna. It's really, you take us memory lane.
Yeah.
But if I can add to this that, there are many NGOs and there are many projects in Armenia from the diaspora. But there are very few that they are able to make an impact on an institutional level. And I always stress that whatever you do in education, in whatever issue you take, that it's good to, because one day the NGO will close down, but what remains there? And it should be something at the institutional level, through the legislation, through the mechanism that they put in place, through the procedures and trainings and all that. Because, and this is what really I'm proud of, and that it's impactful of our organization. I'm also very thankful to the tremendous $1 million donation by Sirpuk Sarkisian from San Francisco to All Armenia Fund. And through that, we were able to train the support centers, one in each region of Armenia, and also to open our second shelter, and also furnish the transitional house that we just opened this year for women that can work and can go to work and they're not that much in danger. So year after year, we expanded. And when Lenna said that we're learning all the time, it's true. This year, we learned about cyber violence, and that we try to include that in the legislation, which Armenia does not have at the moment. So every time it's a new step, we take new steps to improve and to also help the government to address those new issues. It's an ongoing journey.
You mentioned the transitional house. I'd be interested to hear more about that. Ani, Maro?
This is, a new model for Armenia. So up until this point, there's been no such thing in Armenia. And how a transitional house differs from an emergency shelter is that at the emergency shelter, a woman will come on average for 2 months if she has children with her children. and it's a completely closed environment for her safety. So if she needs to leave the shelter, for instance, for urgent medical need or for a court trial or for another issue, then she leaves with one of our advocates, one of our social workers. But otherwise, it's a closed environment. And it's meant to be not just a roof over her head and her children, for her children, but also a place in which they can start the process of rehabilitation and working with our specialized team. So the social workers, the psychologists, and our lawyers who provide legal consultation and legal representation will work with the clients at the shelter who are residing at the shelter. The transitional house is just as it sounds. It's for women who are transitioning back into society. So these are women who have work already or who are in the process of gaining employment, and they need a little bit of extra support. For a lot of our clients, economic abuse is a really big issue. So a lot of them have not worked or haven't been able to work or haven't been able to continue their educations, have been stuck at home. So it gives them a little bit of time to adjust and integrate into society, take off on their professional careers. So just a bit of time for that. And then they, of course, have to live independently following this. This we hope to show as a proof of concept because, like I said, it doesn't exist or it hadn't existed before this year. And just as we showed a proof of concept for our emergency shelter, which the government now to some degree supports, we want to also show that this is a working model for Armenia, and it's something that really is desperately needed. Because there are so many women for whom the existing emergency shelter is just not simply a viable option. Women can't leave their jobs. They can't leave their livelihoods, especially if it's the only means to support their families. So this is an option for them that didn't exist before.
And has it been successful so far?
Well, it's in its early stages, so I can't give you numbers at this point, but hopefully in a year from now, we can provide more information to you.
Lenna, you briefly mentioned breaking taboos also in the diaspora, because gender-based violence is something that is not spoken about even in the US or Canada in our diasporan communities. How important is that to get the conversation rolling there as well?
Oh, I think it's important for our communities, absolutely. I think I have two daughters that are in the community now. I think recognition of problems like this is still a challenge, right? Challenging those norms continues and persists. And in the United States in particular, we've seen, a rolling back of reproductive rights, right? Which so we're in some cases we're losing progress. We still have a pay gap that's stubbornly there that we've not been able to narrow. It's hard to see when that's going to change with the fact that women can't, that women sacrifice quite a bit when they take maternity leave. So yeah, absolutely. And I think the collaboration between Armenia and the United States, or certainly the diaspora in general, is incredibly important. So yeah.
And I also think that our communities in general are conservative.
Yeah.
And I know that women, as Lenna mentioned, they would come up and say, my mother, my husband, my sister. And, to tell you frankly, I was taken aback that how many women have gone, and you would not expect, because you think that we're less patriarchal in the States, in the Western world, or we have more educated women, but these things do happen. And I think that talking about them and acknowledging them, of course there are services in the United States, I'm not saying no, but acknowledging them in the community, it also raises the awareness. And Lenna has more experience that whenever we go out in the community, even if we do awareness raising, they come out and donate because it's something that speaks to them.
Yeah,
I think.
Or they want us to come specifically to their organization and speak to it. Like I belong to this organization or this church group or this, and they have people in mind that they know they're struggling. And so sometimes it's this type of forum that can elevate some of those issues and give people the space to think that they don't have to actually endure the suffering.
And the having Lenna, I said, people on our board from in the diaspora, it's an extension in a way of communicating in both ways. They are sending us resources, information. They can educate the community, so it's a two-way, I think.
Yeah, I know we've had people come to our events specifically because they have had a family member who actually sought support from the center, and they wanted to come back and just tell a story.
I think it's also important to note that the diaspora itself isn't uniform, and in America and in other places in the world. But, we have newer arrivals from Armenia immigrating to Los Angeles and other places. And we've had on occasion phone calls actually coming to our hotline in Armenia from the women themselves or from their family members living in Armenia. Because for those newer arrivals, you can imagine there's a cultural difference, there's a language difference, and they might not have trust in officials or authorities in America. So we've been able to be a bridge in that way as well.
And speaking of diaspora, I don't want to consider diaspora, but this was a Tufenkian project, right? So when we were addressing the Tufenkian office in Karabakh and we were asking, do you have cases over there? So no, we don't have this problem here. But because they don't have any law, they don't have any services, they were not aware. The moment they come to Armenia, we're getting more and more of the Karabakh women, Artsakhtsi women coming to us with this issue. And it's a big problem for them because as a refugee, displaced person, the insecurity, the socioeconomic insecurity is much greater. And also they feel very guilty because their men defended the country, and to report them to the police, it's sort of like a betrayal. But more and more women are coming out. You have to remember domestic violence. There are triggers. PTSD is a trigger.
Sure.
Unemployment is a trigger. It's not a cause, but it's a trigger. So we have to address that as well.
Yeah, you mentioned the displaced people from Artsakh coming in, and these triggers, PTSD, unemployment, and such. I'd be interested more to hear about more about what's going on with those cases, and then what the center is doing to address those really tough cases.
We address them the same way as anybody else. It's standard. Of course, there is more of an effort because they don't have that support system that maybe other women have through the extended family. Sure. Sometimes the family is dispersed, but it's the same way. We go through the same process: social work, psychological assistance, legal if necessary. Yeah.
What we saw just after the war, we actually went out to those collective shelters, if you remember, that were set up because that was an avenue in which to actually, find people in group settings and do awareness raising workshops. And we found that when our team members did that, when they went out into the regions and when they spoke about what domestic violence is, what safety planning means, there were a lot of women who didn't recognize that what they were even experiencing was domestic violence in the first place. And for many people, of course, coming from Artsakh, they didn't know about the existing services. So this was really influential as well. And we saw a lot of referrals after those workshops. We did the same thing in 2023 after the forced displacement, where we went out and we did these workshops. And again, a lot of people were being referred. But as Maro mentioned, there's socioeconomic concerns and other major hurdles. So we saw a sort of trickling of cases in the emergency period after 2020 and after 2023. But it was, after people sort of relocated and settled that we saw more and more cases coming. Not everyone is ready to, of course, break the cycle of violence. And a lot of times we get phone calls from women from Artsakh who are just seeking information because they're not ready to take that step for all the reasons that Maro already mentioned. I will also add that for Artsakhtsis especially, who have many children, this is also extremely huge hurdle to overcome, because it's one thing to live independently and try to eke out a living. But if you have 5 children under the age of 10 to care for, it's tremendously challenging. So there's a lot more barriers. But we're doing our best to get the word out because, as we kind of talked about when we talked about our impact, so much of it has to do with word of mouth and knowing what services are available.
Can I wrap up with something?
Sure.
I think we covered a lot of subject matter. I want to thank our donors, actually, because the vast majority, we have a $375,000 budget per year. And the vast majority, it comes from grants. Now there is going to be a shortage of grants. I don't know, with USAID and the Europeans putting money into the defense. And then a little bit from the government. But what sustained us were donations from the diaspora, because many NGOs, what they do in order for them to exist, they have to be very agile and apply for different types of services. So, for example, they apply for women and peace, women in labor, women in politics. So they changed their direction. We were able to stay consistent on domestic violence. And that's what enabled us to grow and to become better in what we do with experience over the years. Because we did not shift into other areas. We stayed focused on domestic violence. So that's why I take this opportunity again to say that those diasporans who believe in this cause, who believe in the well-being of women, to continue to support us. We are on website at womensupportcenter.org. And you can donate online, and we'll be very grateful towards that. As you can see, our work has impact on many levels, on people's lives, on children's lives, at the institutional level, and to create the roots of addressing domestic violence to combat it properly in this country.
Maro, you wanted to wrap up, but I'm gonna have one final question, and it's open to everyone. But let's end off with like a forward-looking question about really what gives you hope about what's happening in Armenia, and ultimately what's next for the center in all this. I'd be interested to hear from all three of you.
Look, a lot of it has to do with politics, unfortunately, because and we see that in the United States. When the leadership in the United States has changed, we regressed into the women's issues. The same thing here. I mean, if we go towards the Russian perspective, some of the opposition, that's what they want to go towards the Russian thing. It's very dangerous. In Russia, they regressed. They consider that moderate violence is accepted by law. They closed down women organization, Women Support Center. So they don't want us to go towards European rule of law and human rights values, women's rights, human rights. So that's really something that I keep always in my mind. And I'm very concerned that if comes to the, next year we have an election in Armenia, and if the conservative or the pro-Russian forces come into leadership, that's going to be a big challenge for us. If we continue on the same path, I foresee a lot of changes. We already have another package of amendments that we'd like to present to the parliament. And hopefully we can continue to advance the cause and to create improvements in how we address and how we combat domestic violence.
Yeah, I remain, well, obviously politics dictates next steps, but I remain hopeful because despite all of the hurdles that we've faced over the last decade, from COVID to war to displacement, despite economic instabilities and political instability, we've only seen a positive trajectory when it comes to social issues like domestic violence. So, and I also, if we zoom out and we look at what's going on in the region, in Turkey, there's rollbacks of rights on women's rights, on civil society. We see the same in Russia, Azerbaijan, of
And
course,
now in Georgia.
and now in Georgia. So, of course, these things are politically motivated, and it's hard to know what direction Armenia will head in. But I still think, all things considered, we are so much more pro-democratic here, and we are definitely we're still going on that trajectory, at least for now. So I remain hopeful.
Yeah.
Lenna?
Yeah, I mean, I've been traveling to Armenia for many years, and for me, what gives me hope is the young women that I see everywhere doing things. People like Ani, but then also the women in the streets. They're getting up. They are in no longer wearing 4-inch stilettos. They're in casual shoes. They're going to work. They're getting things done. They're getting educated. They're starting companies, whether it's in the private sector, in the NGO space. They're not taking no for an answer. They're persistent. They're finding their purpose in life, and both for themselves individually and for the country. They're very outward looking. They're smart, they're inspiring. I just went to Gapan yesterday for 2 days. I traveled with a bunch of them, and it's incredibly inspiring to hear them navigating through their work lives and what they're doing. So I see that progress among young women especially, and I feel hopeful. I feel like they have a direction that my generation probably didn't have at that age. I think they've benefited from people like Maro Matosian and Jilozian, but I think that they're finding their own path, and I think that's really exciting. So that's kind of ultimately what keeps me motivated.
On that hopeful note, I want to thank all three of you for this fruitful conversation. And thank you for joining us on this episode of Conversations with the Tufenkian Foundation. The story of the center is inspiring. It's a powerful reminder that even the most complex issues, ones like domestic violence, can be addressed with courage, with community, and with support. So to learn more about the Women's Support Center and to support their work, as Maro mentioned, visit womensupportcenter.org and follow them on social media. And we'll be back soon with more conversations that spotlight those working for lasting change in Armenia. Thank you.